There's so much noise and anxiety around Kyle Shanahan, and a lot of it is false criticism and just pearl clutching, and it's ridiculous. Like, if the 49ers want to get rid of Kyle Shanahan, I will drive him to Chicago to coach the Bears myself tomorrow. Let's just hop right in with a topic that everybody in Northern California obviously is just, panicking about. Even when it's good, 49er fans are panicking. So now there's an awful lot of anxiety out there in the air. Why do you think the 49ers are pointed in the wrong direction at this point in this season?
Well, I mean, I think Bosa said it yesterday that we're a couple plays away from being 8-2, and he's not wrong, right? They were in control of 3 divisional games, right? To me, the Kansas City game, you can say, was that the game Debo got sick and they had some injuries and weird things happen. I thought they kind of got worked in that game, but whatever. Like you lost to the Chiefs. Who cares?
That happens.
You had a double-digit lead against the Rams. You had a double-digit lead against the Arizona Cardinals, who were not playing as well at the time as they're playing now. And that you just can't lose to Seattle when absolutely owned them, right, in Geno's career. And we're even owning them kind of in that game. I mean, that pick he threw across his body. And to lose those 3 games, I think are pretty devastating. Now, part of it is like it's just been a lot's been going on. I mean, Ayuk, from the holdout to his leg getting shattered to even that Seattle game. It's hard. They have older players, so when you see the injury report, you're like, this guy didn't practice. You're like, whatever, they're going to play. And most of the time, but all of a sudden, Schefter tweets out on Saturday night or Sunday morning, Kittle's out. You're like, what? He just had one of the best games of the season. Like that was a pretty big moment, I thought. Like, what?
It feels like the 49ers lead the league in Guy has good game last week. There's no sense of him being injured at all. And then on Wednesday, the following week, you find out, he might not be ready to go. It's crazy.
It's rare to have like Bosa. You can see he's in a lot of pain.
Right.
And he's doing your classic football. He's trying to play through it. When he has to tap out of the game, I can't even imagine the splintering pain going through the side of his body. But like the Kittle thing has kind of, that to me symbolizes a lot of this season of like, you never really know what you're going to get. Like he just looked like one of the best players in the NFL the week before. And now he has a hurt hamstring and he can't go and still kind of in question this week. Clearly offensively, they just haven't been as potent. And I think everyone blamed because Christian was out. It's like, well, even early in the season when Ayuk was there, you still have Debo Samuel, you have Kittle, you have Juwan Jennings. Mason through like 5 or 6 games was leading the league in rushing. Like I think that was kind of a BS excuse. Like, let's just face it. Sometimes I'm sure we'll get into Kyle Shanahan. You just, you have a bad podcast. You have a bad game. Like Kyle's just had some rough moments.
Yeah.
And he ultimately is the orchestrator of this all, especially offensively. And they have been off. And listen, I put special teams on him, not because he's the special teams. He's the head coach.
Right.
And you get kind of what you emphasize. And I think clearly we know he does not care. I don't blame him for Jake Moody getting injured. Nothing you can do when your kicker gets injured in a game. But the constant coverage and this isn't a one-off 2024 issue. This has been going on for 6 or 7 years. And I just think like they've invested. They drafted a kicker high. Whether it works out or not, only time will tell. They drafted a punter high. He's been pretty Mitch when he's healthy. He's injured as well. But when he's healthy, like, fine. But the coverage stuff is like, you guys emphasize breaking tackles on offense and tackling on defense. Like, how do you not emphasize this stuff in practice?
Yeah. I mean, all of the special teams problems, not one of them, as far as I'm concerned, has anything to do with a kicked football.
No,
it's all kick and punt coverage and stay in your lane and stuff that JV coaches used to yell at you on high school practice fields on how to cover punts. It's a little nuts. And I do think for a guy who is, wrapped up in the details of everything, it's amazing how he has just let special teams be a detail that he is unconcerned with when it has come back to bite him so often throughout this year. You brought up Jordan Mason. And it's not like you go to a Broadway play and you find out the understudy's there and it's like, this isn't going to be nearly as good as it was. And Jordan Mason isn't Christian McCaffrey, obviously. No one else is. No one catches the ball out of the backfield like he does. But Mason was leading the NFL in rushing
he was
just a handful of weeks ago. And since McCaffrey has returned, has carried the ball 3 times over 2 weeks. Isaac Guerrero, who they drafted and had a good October after a rocky start, he's had 1 carry in the month of November. There's so much noise and anxiety around Kyle Shanahan, and a lot of it is false criticism and just pearl clutching, and it's ridiculous. Like if the 49ers want to get rid of Kyle Shanahan, I will drive him to Chicago to coach the Bears myself tomorrow. Like I dare you to fire.
How many teams? How many teams do you think would be interested? 25.
Oh, the line would be anyone who's looking for a head coach in the NFL. There'd be 9 franchises trying to get to Kyle Shanahan.
Well, teams would. I mean, the Eagles would fire Sirianni yesterday and hire Kyle Shanahan.
Right? That's so something right there.
Beside all the good teams, like obviously the Harbaugh brothers aren't going anywhere. Andy's not going anywhere. Dan Campbell's in a pretty good spot.
Right.
You know,
think Robert Kraft might not be interested.
I mean, I can't even. The list would be long, and the amount of he would immediately become the highest paid coach in the NFL because just supply demand and the multiple teams going after him. Again, that's not. It's a pointless conversation because in no world are you firing Kyle Shanahan.
Exactly.
When I worked for Andy Reid, it was at the tail end of his Eagles stuff. But he had some up and down seasons. And looking back, like Andy, I know the Eagles won a Super Bowl with Doug, but they've ran through 3 different coaches. And if Sirianni loses in the playoffs, he'll probably be gone. They'll be on their 4th. Andy Reid's just cruising along. And I'm not saying their personalities are different. I think Andy's a little more true West Coast, lighter guy. Maybe Kyle will lighten up as he gets a little older. But both can be stubborn, both offensive guys. And I think the one thing back to the special teams, because when I was with Andy, like special teams was a problem too. I think, with LaFleur and McVay, special teams have been an issue. I think defensive guys put more of an emphasis on it. Like obviously Belichick way back in the day coached it, but Tomlin and Jim Harbaugh, who's an offensive guy, but really he's more like a middle
John
linebacker.
Harbaugh, he was a special teams coach, right?
They're wired like defensive guys tackling. It's a big deal where the offensive guys are just worried about plays and designs and they're great at it. But, to me, this is where like whoever the best, like if this dude at the Saints, who's now their interim coach, Riz, who's been one of the better special teams coaches, it's kind of nerdy football stuff, the best special teams coach. But you just like, what's your going rate? $1.5 million instead of paying, because it's not like the Niners special teams coach makes $50K, he's probably making $800,000. It's just not working. So you just overpay to get a guy. You don't even need to think about it. The Andy's guy was a longtime guy for the Chicago Bears, Dave Tobe.
Yeah.
Back in their heyday with the Urlacher Briggs days, they were awesome on special teams with Hester, but it wasn't even just returns. It was the whole operation. And he's like, we'll just get the best guy, and I don't even have to think about it, and you just run it like I do when I hire Fangio to run my defense or something.
Right.
And I think
dude, special teams and Robbie Gould used to be the best chance the Bears had to score today back in those days.
Yeah.
They really did. So, to bring it back to Shanahan, though, and all the false criticism that falls on him by just bad content creators who know that they're going to get a lot of clicks by screaming about Shanahan. What, to me, does kind of drive me nuts about the guy, who is a brilliant head coach and I think is great at designing plays and calling plays. And
he's won 8 playoff games.
Right. I mean, look, Debo and company may have all gotten old at the same time. There's a part of that's in here. But what does drive me nuts about him is how he has Jordan Mason and Christian McCaffrey, and it's all of one and none of the other. Hasn't he ever seen like old wishbone footage? You can have 2 running backs on the field at the same time, especially a guy that you can flex out. It drives me nuts that McCaffrey and Mason haven't hit the field together at some point, especially with the offensive struggles that they've been having over the last couple of weeks.
But it was like that last year where they would have, I mean, obviously they were a way better team last year. They would be in these games where they were in complete control in the second half, and he's still riding McCaffrey like carries in the mid-20s. It's like, why? It was clear Mason, I didn't know he was this good, but it was clear he was an NFL player, handing the ball sometimes.
Yeah.
Like Kyle's the Tom Thibodeau of the NFL. It's like, I'm only playing my guy. It's like, Kyle, this guy just almost missed half the season with an injury that even Christian's like, yeah, don't really know what it is. Clearly not good. And it's like, you have another guy who's really good. And honestly, like you said, Garendo, the rookie, he's kind of unique because of the high-end speed. So if he just breaks a run, maybe you get, I don't know, an explosive play that's been a struggle for the offense. So he gets very weird with his running back position. And he was like this with Mason. Once you're just the starter, you just get all the carries, which is kind of unheard of in 2000, I would say 24, even the last like 4 or 5 years with running. Watch the Eagles with Saquon. They ride Saquon, but all of a sudden they'll just have their other guys in there taking carries.
Right, you see Gainwell get a carry
all the time. Yeah, he'll just get like a series after like 4 Saquon series. I don't know, to give the guy a breather. You take a beating. And, Christian, listen, he's got a lot of tread on those tires, a lot of Stanford carries, a lot of time in Carolina, and the injury stuff. Wouldn't you just want to, I don't know, just take it a little easy? But that's Kyle's shown now. That's not the way he rolls.
No, it's definitely not. Look, you roll in a way where you talk to an awful lot of behind the scenes people. You are dialed in an NFL way that a lot of content creators aren't. Former scouts, you have a network of information, and you know how teams are studied and what a copycat league the NFL has always truly been. Has Shanahan, John, been so studied? Has his running game been so thoroughly poured over in every single NFL, headquarters, that the league has learned so much about how Kyle goes about his operation that they're onto his tendencies a little bit now? Has he been overstudied, and is that what has closed the gap between the rest of the NFC and the 49ers?
Well, I think he is, when you watch McVay, now granted, he's got Stafford, even this older version, when he's on, you can just ride him for 45 pass attempts in a game, right? I would say he's the one old guy in the league who can just play with like the top 5 guys, Mahomes, right. Allen, Burrow, Lamar, Herbert, kind of that crew. Like Stafford immediately can play like them on, definitely a one-off basis.
I don't know how old Stafford is, but his arm is still 26.
Yeah, and he has games where like, is this the best quarterback in the NFL? And McVay likes to pass it a little bit more. And Kyle really is a much more of a throwback like his dad and most of the coordinators from the 80s and the 90s that will run it constantly. And I had Jay Gruden on probably like 2 months ago, and he was saying, listen, Kyle's run game scheme is incredible. And when it works, the pass game off that is kind of stealing, right? All the boots and stuff. There was a play in that Seattle game. They didn't run as many that they basically booted Purdy on like a play action, and the defender was right there. How often now when they move Purdy off the play action fake and he goes the other way, does the defender sit right there? They're not biting as much. And one thing Jay said is like, listen, all the coaches, everyone studying that game offensively and defensively, his run game. But like when it comes to just his drop back passing game, it's not viewed very highly because he doesn't really have one. It's all tied to the run. So if he doesn't just destroy you on the ground, which a lot of his successful seasons, that's what he's done. And obviously last year with McCaffrey being like an MVP player, it throws off his passing game because he's not, I don't know if it's necessarily the design of his offense, if it's his comfortability calling the plays. Like in a perfect world, Andy Reid will spread you out and throw it 50 times. But like this year's a good example. Really the last couple, right? They don't have the personnel. So he's like, listen, I just got to ride Pacheco and now I got to ride. Andy has just turned in, I'll do whatever it takes to win.
Right. And he's also got a defense that he can lean on. I mean, like
exactly. But even Kyle, like his defense, it's not as good as it has been, but it's still relative to the NFL pretty good. Like just sometimes you got to play different. And for the most part, Kyle just plays like he plays. Right.
Right.
And his run game's a huge part of it. And he's
that
like
ego? There's no way the guy doesn't.
I just think he's mastered it. I think when you master something, you just like playing the hits because you think you can call the right play at the right time. And I think these teams now have seen so much of it. And listen, I don't pretend to know like as much scheme as he does, but I do think there's got to be some balance. The other thing is, let's face it, if you are going to be willing to pay a quarterback $50+ million a year, like you better be willing to ride his arm. Because if you're not, then it's not going to be a good enough investment.
Right. It's like when you sign Brandon Ayuk for $30 million, you better target him like a $30 million a year.
But like that's a good example. And they were in a weird spot. If they could have that back, I think it's fair to say they just would have traded him, but like before the draft.
100%. Yeah.
And I think they tried to have the cake and eat it too. They're like, well, we might trade him before the draft and we get like the 15th pick. It's like, no, you're not getting that. If they could do it over again, they would have traded him for like a 2 and a 3 before the draft. Right. Yeah. So they could have picked players and done whatever. It would have been
great value. At that point, everyone would have been like, oh, you didn't get enough. Looking at what other guys have been traded for since the season's begun, that would have been fantastic.
And the money that you allocated toward him, like you just realize, again, he's a good player. My issue with that whole situation, they were in a tough spot because he's a good player. He's a winning player. But in this offense, he was never going to be Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson catching 120 balls,
right?
Or even the way the Eagles ride their 2 guys. So, like, does it make sense to pay this much money for a guy who max is going to catch 80 balls a year? It's like, well, it's Yak. It's like, okay, great. But his production is his production.
Right.
Where McCaffrey's value is really high, or even Trent's, because you're going to run the ball all the time. But Ayuk, I mean, Juwan Jennings is 2 years, $15 million. It's just
one of the best deals in football, based on what he's playing.
Debo just looking kind of slow hurts them.
Yeah.
I mean, it does. I mean, he's I mean, when he was rolling, you're like, well, I got this guy who can basically I can run tunnel screens too nonstop. He can catch all these short intermediate routes. And then if my running back gets hurt, he can basically just be my running back and carry the ball 7 to 10 times and
Not
be
anymore.
a really good running back. And now you're watching him, you're like, God, maybe it's his hamstring, but he looks kind of slow, which is a problem. And like you mentioned earlier, if it is true, he's just old, which happens in football, or the tread is finally caught up on his tires. It's a problem, and that means they're probably not going to make the playoffs. Yeah. I mean, I think we'll know in these next 2 weeks. I would say at minimum they have to split them to be 6-6 and give themselves a chance. If they lose them both, it's 100% game over.
Yeah, I mean, coming out of Tampa, I said, so the next 3 games are a must win followed by a must split. They lost the must win. That makes the must split,
You could argue this is must win because, like, are they going to go on the road to beat Buffalo?
No, just based on what we're seeing. I think
they might have lost that game if this season was last year and they were 13-4. That probably would have been one of their losses, which is like, whatever.
Yeah. Look at it this way.
When are you ever going to have to go on the road to Buffalo? Not in the playoffs.
Any team that can beat Kansas City in their own stadium is a game that you should worry about. So there you go right there. What is a fair price for Brock Purdy? What is a fair price that allows him to get market value and get paid? He's absolutely given at the office with the starting salary point of his career. But what's a fair price that the team can still be functional around him? If it were up to you to negotiate this deal for Parag Marathe, what's the number you would seek?
Well, I'm a big believer in, like, what's the rush? And, if last season had been his 3rd season, then you would have had to just pay the premium that was going. But it's like, this season's been a little rocky. So you're still under contract next year. And clearly, off the field now because he plays for the 49ers, he's making millions of dollars, right? For the cowboy boots, John Deere, and I'm sure local deal. Like, he's fine.
He's selling Toyota truck.
To pay, I think you see this. Like, Tua clearly is a really solid player, but he's not like no one. If you just did a draft from scratch, like, he's not going in the top 10. So when you pay that much money to somebody and you still have questions about him being, like, it just puts you in a weird spot. Now, I think Purdy has proven to be better than that over time, but they're still like, what's he going to look like this week in Lambeau if it's snowing, freezing cold, and you can't grip? Like, if he has an incredible last month and a half and leads them back and they win a playoff game, I'd be like, yeah, it is what it is. But if they go 8-9, do you just have to pay him next year, or can you let it go again? It's like, well, you're just going to pay more. Like, okay, I'm willing to do that. I'm not willing to do that at, like, other positions, but at quarterback, my whole franchise is somewhat determined about him once I sign a contract. Now the Niners have been more balanced. It hasn't been all on his, but once I give him, like, I would love to give him, like, 4 years, $120 million. I'd guarantee every penny, something like that. But that's not really the way it works. But if I'm going to pay the going rate of these enormous numbers, like, I don't think I'm just cutting that check after an 8-9 season when I got one more. I just let it ride again. I'm not acting like cutting them or I can do better, because we can tell it's pretty hard. But I'm just, let's pump the brakes. Let's just.
But I mean, his agent's job is to make sure that he doesn't agree to that, right? If you're Brock Purdy's agent, you don't let him back on the field on a 1-year deal.
Well, let's just say that. So they go, let's say 8-9, and they miss the playoffs, and they're drafting like 14th or 15th. Do you think he does an Ayuk and just nowhere to be found? Because I have I bet he would show up.
I think he will too. He's such a good soldier.
But it's not even a good shoulder. It's like, listen, there's a lot of money on the line. How often do quarterbacks, like the Ayuks, and I understand where they're coming from, because at any moment your leg could get shattered. How often do quarterbacks really get seriously injured? It's pretty rare. Yeah. I mean, hell, we just saw Kirk Cousins tear his Achilles and get $100 million. Now, Cousins, you would say, has a longer resume and had less on the line. He'd already made a lot more money. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. In Purdy's game, I would say, unlike Cousins, is much more like his athleticism. Like a lot of his success is tied to him moving around. If he couldn't move like Cousins, he wouldn't be nearly as good as he is. Do you agree with that? Like if he was just a statue in the pocket, like a Goff or Cousins, like he would not be a good player. His versatility
totally
makes
agree.
him
Totally
a dynamic player. So it is risky, but I would be hesitant to just hand out a $50+ million because it's not even about the yearly. It's like, are you guaranteeing him $200 million? Like Nick Bosa is clearly one of the best players in the league when healthy. He got like 120. So you would give, and I get it, quarterback, be $80 million more guaranteed to Purdy. That seems pretty bold. Coming off like an 8-win season where it's like, just had some moments against better teams. The other thing is like he's played some good teams and he had some moments in the playoffs, but it was also not like just dominant performances. Like you feel really good. That's where the top 5, even Lamar, he gets nitpicked, and rightfully so. But in the big game, sometimes he lets you down a little bit, but there's no disputing his physical gifts and his dominance. And obviously now Herbert with Harbaugh, you're like, holy shit, this guy looks like John Elway. Burrow, I mean, he's incredible. Mahomes' resume speaks for itself, and Josh Allen might be his best opportunity this year to win a Super Bowl. Like those guys are just, you feel good about paying. Even if you're the Bengals and you end up winning 6 games, you're like, I'd pay Burrow. We got a discount on this player.
Right.
Where I just think that's the thing with Purdy in the class he's in is much more, the Dax and the Goff. Dak's a good example. Like there's not that big of a difference between Dak and Goff. When Dak's on really good teams, he puts up sweet numbers. He's really good. When he's on a shitty team, he looks terrible. Goff's on a team that's absolutely stacked and is dominating. If you put Goff on the Jags, how do you think he'd look? Right. So it's, so if you put Purdy in, all of a sudden you got to purge the roster. Now, somehow the Niners suck at drafting high. They're pretty good at nailing like 3rd through 6th.
5th rounder all day long.
Yeah, so
look, good luck.
I just think it's a very, like, it's not complicated with certain players. Like, how much are you going to pay TJ Watt? Well, like, what's the going rate? We'll pay him. Right. What are the Bengals going to end up paying Jamar Chase? I don't know, a lot. I do think with certain guys, it should be a very, very difficult discussion. This is not the NBA. It's like max here, or max there, or max there. Like, this is a really big deal. It's also like, okay, Kyle, are you real? Like, you're not going to just, are you here for the next 5 years? Not that like he plans on go, but I'm just saying, like, we're all in this together now. I mean, you talk about really tying everyone together. If we give him a 5-year, $200 million contract.
Yeah, the two of them need to be together. I mean, if one stays, the other stays. That's for sure.
If I told you Kyle left tomorrow, Purdy's value to the Niners would change dramatically.
Of course it would. Absolutely it would.
Where that's the case, like Herbert, Burrow, their value's unchanged, right? If coach leave, coach comes, like their value's their value. Right. Bosa's value is his value. Trent Williams' value is his value.
Purdy's,
that's where Debo's a unique player. It's like his value, even in his prime, was more valuable to Kyle than it was to a lot of other people.
Right. I mean, it feels like any starting quarterback who isn't on the verge of losing his job with 3 bad games in a row is a $35-40 million a year conversation. That is the absolute floor for Brock. Probably more 50 because it's San Francisco and it's hard.
Well, he's won in the playoffs too. Like
he's won in big games. He's won big playoff games as well. So I think it's like a $50-55 million a year floor with a ceiling that could go to 65. I mean, it's
be the highest paid 7th rounder. Probably. I mean, how many 7th rounders will we ever see make that level of money ever again?
Probably none.
Very rare.
Yeah, probably none. He's probably about to get the single biggest year-over-year raise in the history of North American sports contracts. I mean, that's what he would kind of be looking at.
Probably in the history of the world. When non like
I don't know, there's some weird soccer things that always happen. I don't know about that.
That's true.
Are you ready to play a lightning round? Because I mean, I could talk Niners with you all day, but I got a few other things to get through in the NFL. Little lightning round. You ready to go?
Yeah.
Are the Raiders going to bring back Antonio Pierce for a second bite at the dysfunctional apple?
My gut tells me no because Mark doesn't want to do it, but I have talked to so many people either in or around the NFL that thinks it's like a lock he's done. And look at their schedule. I don't know if they might not win again. So you win, even if they win 3 wins. I mean, it's a rough season. It's just this team looks way worse than last year. And I mean, part of the reason he got hired, right, was because they were competitive at the end. And really that Baltimore game, probably one of the all-time outliers not just this season, but over the last like 4 or 5 years. I mean, Baltimore plays that game 10 times. They were up 10 points in the fourth quarter and lost to the Raiders. It's crazy.
That is nuts. That is nuts. Joe Douglas, who just got fired by the Jets, I think he's a pretty damn good GM. Like I'd like to see him get a shot in a non-dysfunctional situation. Where does Joe Douglas resurface?
GMs usually only get one shot.
But man, this guy's
not a lot of guys get double. And the one thing I'm not defending Woody Johnson. Obviously, the guy's nuts.
Right.
But part of that story was like he wanted to talk to him after the Denver game. Like, I don't totally blame him. If I owned the team, I'd be like, what? We just lost 10-9 to a rookie quarterback, and we got Aaron Rodgers. He not only drafted Zach Wilson, which was the guy's a third stringer. Like, the reason Kyle and John got away with drafting Trey Lance and giving all Purdy fell into their lap. If they had been in a similar situation, they would have been screwed too. And then he chased it with Aaron Rodgers, who, let's face it, a little like Russell Wilson to Denver, has just been an objective disaster and a fleecing from the Packers because they got rid of their problem, got to transition, and he's just like most, I would say, athletes our entire lives. When you hit 38, 39, 40, NBA, baseball, definitely football, you usually fall off a cliff.
You think that Aaron Rodgers resurfaces anywhere, or is he done this year after New York?
I think just it depends who the head coach and the GM is. I could see if you just take over the job at your classic, like he's still under contract next year. If you want, part of the reason these guys keep going, where else do you make $35-40 million in the real world? So like I could see him come back for one more year to make the money. Also, maybe hopefully just like not tarnish my legacy as bad. Maybe we have a decent season. I could see Rodgers being their quarterback or they'd have to cut him because would anyone trade for a $35-40 million Aaron Rodgers right now?
Ben Johnson, OC in Detroit, Dan Lanning, head coach at Oregon, Deion Sanders, Colorado. Which one becomes an NFL head coach first?
Ben Johnson. I have a hard time seeing Dan Lanning. He's 38. It used to be you make more money in the NFL. Like, what's Dan Lanning making? $10-11 million. If an NFL team wanted to give him 15, or Nike easily in Oregon easily could.
Right.
Who was the other guy you listed? Oh, Deion. Yeah, I could, I think that, like, are the Giants hiring Deion Sanders? No. I think the Cowboys and the Raiders, if they have the top pick and Shedeur Sanders, like, it does make a lot of sense. Like, the easiest way to get everyone off Mark Davis's back or Jerry Jones' back, hire Deion Sanders, and kind of like, it just makes everyone happy for a moment. Would it work? I don't know. You could argue too, like what he's doing in college. I think he just landed one of the top quarterbacks.
He did
today.
He did.
His skill of recruiting and everything. Spurrier. You've seen a lot of these guys. Bobby Bowden, these CEO, huge personalities. Now, Deion clearly knows defense, but like his main skill being the brand, being the recruiter. Like, to me, he's like a little younger. Like, he learned from Bobby Bowden. Show up in the limo, like. That's irrelevant in the NFL. Andy doesn't recruit anyway. I got 1 first-round pick. I got 1 second-round pick. We got $7 million in cap space. Like, I guess I can kind of recruit you. Are you willing to pay, for $2 million? Because that's all the money we got. Like, it's so different in the pros. It's why Kyle, in theory, big brain, scheming. It's all about scheme. The recruiting's irrelevant. So I don't know if Deion would actually work in the pros, but maybe he would.
Yeah, I don't know how many, other pros are going to be really excited that, Warren Sapp's on my coaching staff.
It's like Pat Shurmur's his offensive coordinator. I remember Pat Shurmur being offensive coordinators for different teams, and the team couldn't wait to get him out of there.
Right. No one was that impressed with the Pat Shurmur experience. Which dysfunctional NFL situation do you actually think is the best of the dysfunctional situations? The Cowboys, who've got Jerry Jones always tinkering. The Jets, who, for a number of reasons are a mess, but also, have a considerable amount of talent actually on that roster. Or the Cleveland Browns with the Deshaun Watson contract and situation just constantly hanging over them. Which of those situations is actually best?
I would put the Browns last because of the quarterback situation and that contract. I'd probably go Jets, Cowboys. I mean, the Cowboys have won, 36 games over the last 3 years coming into this year. Jerry's shown an ability to draft. I think the Jets' problem is they do have some talent, but they got guys now that are going to be going into their third and fourth year. That's usually when guys get paid. So like Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner have been cheap. Well, I mean, they view themselves as superstars. So it's like you start having to pay these guys. It changes the dynamics. I would say they're all pretty major red flags. You know, if Jerry was just more like most owners, just didn't say anything, I do think the Cowboys would be a pretty good job. I do think it's hard to be a head coach when your owner talks all the time. And not just about like business, like he's talking so in depth on football. And which is probably, if you have a good relationship, is cool because he loves it and he knows it. Like he played at Arkansas, but it's got to be a lot. I mean, you know, say this about Woody. Like, when's the last time Woody said a word? He speaks like once a year. I mean, Jerry's speaking every game and then every Tuesday. So even when you have good teams, it's just got to be a difficult proposition if you're trying to be the voice of the team when everyone knows that that's actually the voice of the team.
Yeah, it's funny. I've known a lot of people who have worked with, for, around Colin Cowherd, and you're now one of them as well. You know, my old roommate, Sam Batesh, was on his show. John Goulet, obviously. I've talked to them about their experiences working with, watching, you know, this guy prepare and how it's changed their careers. What have you learned from Colin Cowherd, and what is it like working with him?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say obviously helped change my life. I've gone to Fox a couple times, and early on, I don't even know if I was doing a podcast for him at the time.
You need to get back on that set now. You are Scottsdale, Arizona level tan. So if you're ever going to get back on that TV set, now's the time to do it, tan boy.
Played golf yesterday, and it was about 80 degrees here. And he, you know, the show at Pacific Standard Time starts at 9. They start meeting at about 5:45 in the morning. So it's just, I mean, it's a very, very serious operation in terms of like time spent on it. So it's just like his work habits are pretty elite. And this is, you know, by the time I'm doing this and, you know, seeing him do this maybe 4 or 5 years ago, financially, the guy's set. His career's already been established and set. Like you just, to keep grinding like that is, yeah, it's just you either have it or you don't. And obviously it comes down, I mean, what we get to do for a living, talk about sports is, you know, pretty in terms of like the tough jobs in America, this has to rank pretty low in terms of actual physical difficulty. So it's like not complaining, but it does take a lot of time and he dedicates a lot of time to it. So it's, yeah, just I would say have been one of the short list of figures in my life. Honestly, might be the only one that, like, you know, you grew up, I guess when I was in college is when he went to ESPN. I remember hearing him for the first time and, you know, started listening to a show, and I've never heard anything like it. And then to end up having a, you know, a personal relationship with him, a professional relationship with him, has been a pretty special experience for sure.
You're going to use those, the incredible reach of the volume to get yourself a pass to Augusta for the upcoming Masters. I know you're a big golf guy.
Yeah, I've been working on that. You know, Augusta's tough.
It's the hardest ticket to get in sports.
Yeah, you know, it's one of those, I don't know if that really matters that much. You know, you hear some stories. The thing with Augusta, I definitely would go, but it's one of those, you know, which is probably cool. They don't allow you a phone. So from a content standpoint, it's basically zero.
Oh, content. Yeah, this would be a trip for Johnny. Not
just to enjoy it. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those probably. I don't have many things on my bucket list in terms of sports. You know, we've been lucky in the Bay Area from NBA Finals to World Series to Super Bowls to playoff games, like kind of seen it all. But that would be on the short list of things that, honestly, there's not a long list of things in sports that I really want to experience. And that's probably number one.
I've always loved your perspective. You think like a scout because you were one. You think like a GM. You think like a front office guy. You look at things without emotion. You look at things from a business of football standpoint. Well, as a guy who understands about building and collecting talent and holding on to it, let me take you back to 2015 to like 18 at 95.7 The Game. Listen to this talent that we had. John, look, everybody's gone their own way. Everyone's doing well, I guess. But if we could have kept this together, The Game had you, a national level talent, Haberman, who is a national level talent, Fortenbaugh, a national level talent, Papa and Lund, who've had a huge amount of success here in the Bay Area, Little old me and Ray Ratto, we did really, really well together. You had John Goulet, who went on to produce for Colin Cowherd. You had Jeremiah Crow, who went on to be the program director at KNBR before he went to go work in the podcast business in Las Vegas as well. We had Jason Barrett, who had put the whole damn station together. Dude, who the hell broke that team up? Good God. Imagine if that were still on the air. Imagine if that had stayed together. What might have frickin' been, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things broke it up. Obviously, poor management. But
Yep.
at the end of the day, the thing that really broke it up was this, and
No doubt.
just the business. I say it all the time. I've been podcasting now for well over, I guess, close to a decade. About 9 years. And, it's not like I was on the forefront of, I saw where it was going, but being forced into it, it was clear right away. It was like, they don't have a chance. And part of it, at the time when I was working with you in like 14, 15, 16 area, there was probably only 4 or 5 years worth of cars that had the direct Bluetooth. But if you think now in 2015, which, we're almost a month away from, you have almost a decade and a half worth of cars that this thing connects to
instantly.
And that, to me, you can say people working from home, all these million things. There are still a ton of people on the road. It's this thing connecting to the car completely ruined the business. And then people that, my dad who's passed away, I remember it was such a big deal the first time that he ever heard, not that I had my own radio show, because, he lived in Davis, so he couldn't even get 95.7, but he heard me go on KNBR. It was just like, holy shit, you had made it. Or I was sitting with, Greg Papa on a Comcast show.
Your KNBR debut, you were like Haberman was doing, like filling in on Sports Phone at the time. And like you were a guest with Haberman. Was that your first KNBR appearance?
Well, no, he did the night show, I think, on 95.7 for the A's. My first radio stuff was not on KNBR, but after we got let go, I went on a couple times, like
okay,
and just with their guys. And he heard me, and he just thought it was, it was way bigger deal than when I had my own show, just because KNBR to him was like, working with like I don't know, like John Madden or something. It was like I had hit the big time.
Yeah, you're a New York Yankee. Congratulations.
Exactly. And I just think things, technology changed, and radio had an incredible run. It had a huge impact on my life as a consumer. As a young kid, I remember I said this the other day, talking about Tom on the podcast and the business. I remember being really, really young, maybe 10 or 11 years old, and what's it, KHD 1140 in Sacramento. And I don't know if the Bay Area had this as well. I don't know. Did you guys have this in the Midwest? Loveline with Drew and Adam Carolla.
Oh, totally.
Was just, we didn't have the internet didn't exist. So I didn't even know what Howard Stern was until Private Parts came out. And even then, I don't think at 15 years old, I could even comprehend really Howard Stern's radio show. Cause if you didn't live back there, you couldn't listen to it. But Loveline, I just remember listening as a kid. I'd never wanted to go to sleep, even though I had to go to junior high the next day. It's like they were having porn stars. I was like, the radio had a huge impact on my life. And up until I was like 15 or 16, we didn't have cable TV at my house. It was just harder. People don't realize, like, not everyone, depending on where you live, cable TV, it was still kind of niche in the mid to late 90s. It was a really big deal when we finally got it. I remember I finally got fucking ESPN. And, the industry is just, for both those, has just dramatically changed really fast at exponential speeds. And now you can feel it growing even faster. The avalanche is coming down the hill. And because, Tom's a good example. And, even Tom's like 28-year run. That's pretty incredible no matter what you like. How many years was Johnny Carson on TV? Like that's a historic run. But like the business, if you and I run a company in the Bay, and we're not 70 years old, but we're, in our 30s, our 40s, or our 50s, we realize the shift. Why am I going to cut the same check to these? Why am I going to give them any money? So they're just not going to be able to generate any money. It's just period, point blank in a story, because that's what the business model is. That's why newspapers died, right?
Right.
They used to be a distribution for ads.
Right. Classified ads got replaced by Craigslist, and that was all she wrote. And we're looking at everything change, like you said, dramatically. The snowball is coming down the hill. It's already hit Shaggy and Scooby-Doo. It's coming for the mystery machine.
Do you think KNBR, when I lived in Philly, and I see, sometimes Jason Barrett sends out clearly in like New York, in Philly and Boston, radio still pretty strong. I think
Right.
in Chicago, is it fair to say still pretty strong there as well?
Yes.
Obviously, in the Bay Area, it's really struggling in terms of just their market share and their ability to make money. Is it around in 5 years?
I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. There's a part of me that thinks, everything that was ever supposed to kill radio, it still hasn't happened, and it'll find a way to exist, but it'll be at such a devalued price point that people won't care nearly as much. I mean, I wonder if the Giants are on KNBR a couple of years from now. I mean, wouldn't they be moving into 24 Willie Mays Plaza as a station and not down to Levi Stadium if they were going to have a long-term relationship still with the Giants? And if KNBR and the Giants go their separate ways, then yeah, any business model you ever thought existed has obviously been punted, and it's a whole new world once again for everyone involved. It's always great to see you, man. It's always great to catch up with you. Again, I'm a huge fan of the 3 and Out podcast. I download it every single time it comes out. And obviously, I'm subscribing to your YouTube page. And John, great to see you, man. Hit him straight down the fairway. Hope that short game's coming along nicely. And if you don't mind me saying publicly, congratulations on being engaged, man. That is fantastic.
Thanks, Damon.
I'm very, very happy for you.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Damon. And keep crushing, bro. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching. Tune into the Damon Bruce Show live on YouTube every weekday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific.